Korean President Yoon Suk-yeol and NATO Chief Mark Rutte discussed the gravity of North Korea sending its troops to Russia to help its fight in Ukraine, sharing related information. The foreign ministry today called in the Russian ambassador to Seoul in protest. With the U.S. presidential election only about 2 weeks away, Democrat Kamala Harris and Republican Donald Trump remain locked in a tight race, and their campaigning gets more heated than ever. Israel continued airstrikes in Gaza over the weekend following the killing of Hamas's leader Yahya Sinwar, killing almost 90 people. It's October 21st, 8 p.m. in Seoul. This is Newscenter. Thank you for joining us. I'm Yoon Jung-min. We start with repercussions of North Korea's deployment of troops to Russia. Speaking with NATO's leader today, President Yoon said his government won't sit idly by as the two sides pledged stronger cooperation, especially in intelligence sharing. Our top office correspondent Kim Do-yeon reports.
South Korea is set to send representatives to NATO to share intelligence on North Korea's deployment of its units to support Russia's invasion of Ukraine. According to a statement from the presidential office on Monday, President Yoon Suk-yeol and NATO Secretary General Mark Rutte spoke on the phone in response to the deployment, and Rutte requested that South Korea send representatives to NATO. This comes after South Korea's National Intelligence Service confirmed the enhanced military cooperation between Moscow and Pyongyang, although as yet it is the only official institution to do so. Russia and North Korea are denying the move while the U.S. Pentagon has yet to confirm it. The statement said that Yoon repeated his message from last week that South Korea won't sit idly by as the deployment threatens peace on the Korean Peninsula as well as the world. He also said the situation reaffirms that security in the Indo-Pacific and the Atlantic regions are inseparably linked, while calling for enhanced cooperation between Seoul and the alliance. Secretary General Rutte, according to the statement, responded by saying that NATO is ready to actively cooperate with South Korea on this issue. He also placed this on his X account after the phone call, saying that, quote, North Korea sending troops to fight alongside Russia and Ukraine would mark a significant escalation. According to the statement, the two leaders also agreed to expedite the process to include South Korea in the NATO's Battlefield Information Collection and Exploitation System, the so-called BICES. This would allow the two sides to share intelligence more safely and efficiently. Kim Do-yeon, Arirang News.
In the meantime, defense authorities were quick to voice criticisms with more evidence suggesting North Korean troops being sent to Russia. The government also called in the Russian ambassador to Seoul to protest. Our correspondent Bae Eun-ji with the details.
A long line of soldiers are waiting to receive their uniforms and equipment while speaking in Korean. The Ukrainian Center for Strategic Communication and Information Security released the video on its social media channels on Saturday, saying the footage shows North Korean troops gearing up at a training ground in Russia's Far East. The center also released a questionnaire that appears to have been prepared by Russia for North Korean soldiers to provide measurements for military uniforms, including hats and shoes. This comes after South Korea's intelligence agency on Friday confirmed that North Korea had deployed around 1,500 Special Forces troops to Russia. Over the weekend, the National Intelligence Service even revealed 3 pictures, including a black and white satellite image depicting a Russian vessel departing from the North Korean port of Cheongjin, which is believed to be carrying North Korean soldiers. As more and more evidence supports North Korea's military deployment to Russia, South Korea's defense ministry on Monday strongly criticized the North. It called on the regime to immediately cease its actions, saying that the military will take necessary measures to protect the safety of Korean citizens.
North Korea's participation in Russia's war of aggression is a violation of United Nations resolutions and an illegal act that deserves condemnation from the international community. It's an act that seriously threatens our national security and the safety of our people.
When asked if South Korea plans to supply lethal weapons to Ukraine, the ministry spokesperson refrained from providing a direct answer, but said the government is open to all possibilities and that they'll review necessary measures while closely monitoring the situation. Also on Monday, South Korea's foreign ministry called in the Russian ambassador to Seoul to protest against Moscow's military cooperation with Pyongyang. Seoul's first vice foreign minister Kim Hong-gyun warned Russia's top envoy that South Korea will sternly respond by using all available means through cooperation with the international community. Meanwhile, Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky has warned that greater North Korean involvement would be detrimental to everyone should its troops become trained for modern warfare. In a video address on Sunday, he called for the international community to take a tougher stance against the North, amid continued speculation that it will become more involved in Russia's war against Ukraine. 배은지, Arirang News.
Meanwhile, North Korea's allegations of South Korean drone incursions have been brushed aside by authorities here amid indications that the incident itself may have been staged by the regime. Our defense correspondent Kim Bo-kyung has more.
Regarding North Korea's accusations of Seoul using drones to drop anti-regime propaganda on Pyongyang, the South Korean government and military have reportedly concluded internally that no drones crossed into the north. According to sources, the administration and military tracked and analyzed flight paths on the days that the regime claimed the South intruded in its airspace, namely the 3rd, 9th, and 10th of this month. No military or commercial drones were confirmed to have crossed the border, hinting at the high possibility that North Korea staged the incidents. One government source said there was no reason for Seoul to provoke Pyongyang with drones, especially considering the risks of violating the armistice agreement. This comes after North Korea claimed on Saturday that it had discovered the remains of at least one drone sent from South Korea, saying it was the same type displayed on Armed Forces Day, a small long-range reconnaissance drone in Seoul earlier this month. An expert noted that North Korea's claims were baseless and unreasonable just by considering whether it was technically possible for that type of drone to operate as the regime claims.
Technically, the drone's flight range is enough to travel to and from Pyongyang, but the purpose of the drone itself is to film, equipped with detection sensors. There isn't enough internal space to store leaflets, and even if that's possible, the flight range would be significantly reduced.
While sharing the same view that this type of drone cannot fly to and from Pyongyang with leaflets as its payload is only hundreds of grams, lawmaker Yoo Young-won from the ruling PPP said the unmanned aerial vehicle unveiled by North Korea was likely a replica manufactured by the regime itself. The Joint Chiefs of Staff, meanwhile, maintained its ambiguous stance, saying there was nothing to confirm.
There is nothing to verify regarding the claim that any unmanned aerial vehicle from our territory crossed into North Korea. North Korea's unilateral claims are not worth verifying, nor are they worth responding to.
Kim Bo-kyung, Arirang News.
In the Middle East, Israel's military campaign against the Palestinian militant group Hamas appears little affected by its recent assassination of the group's mastermind as it continues to ramp up its raids, resulting in more casualties. Lee Seung-jae has the latest.
The Israeli military is continuing its offensives in Gaza, despite the death of Hamas's leader Yahya Sinwar. According to the Gaza Health Ministry, at least 87 people were killed by an Israeli airstrike in northern Gaza on Sunday. The ministry said 40 civilians were among the dead. However, the Israeli military says while it's confirming the exact number of casualties, its initial investigation shows that Hamas has exaggerated the figures. It added that the military is trying to avoid causing harm to civilians. Meanwhile, Israeli Defense Minister Yoav Gallant announced on Sunday that Israeli attacks targeting pro-Iranian militant group Hezbollah in southern Lebanon are intensifying. He added that the IDF has been successful so far in not only defeating its enemy, but also destroying areas that Hezbollah had tried to use to launch airstrikes against Israel. Over the weekend, a drone was launched toward the residence of Israel's leader Benjamin Netanyahu in what he described as an assassination attempt. According to Netanyahu, the assassination attempt on him and his wife by Hezbollah was a grave mistake, and he vowed to continue fighting. The Israeli Prime Minister also spoke with former President Donald Trump on Saturday, where he emphasized that while Israel takes into account the issues Washington raises, it will be his country that will ultimately make the decisions based on its national interests. Thousands of protesters also took to the streets of Tel Aviv on Saturday, calling on the Israeli leader to sign a ceasefire deal that would lead to the release of the Israeli hostages. Relatives of hostages also took part in the protest, saying negotiations were long overdue. It's believed that 101 Israeli hostages are still being held captive by Hamas since the October 7, 2023 attack that sparked the current war in the region. Lee Seung-jae, Arirang News.
We're now counting down about a fortnight to the U.S. presidential election, which takes place on November 5th. Our Incheon covers the campaign trails of the candidates as well as their latest poll standings.
With the 2024 U.S. presidential election fast approaching, both candidates, Democrat Kamala Harris and her Republican rival Donald Trump, remain locked in a tight race. According to a new Reuters Ipsos poll, Harris holds a marginal 3 percentage point lead over Trump, 45% to 42% among registered voters. Scrambling for votes, the two candidates have been focusing their campaigns in the 7 competitive swing states. Over the weekend, Harris campaigned to early voters in Georgia, with polls showing a lack of enthusiasm for her candidacy among black men, who have been a reliable voting bloc for Democrats. Harris highlighted that they were not different from any other demographic, and their votes would have to be earned. In order for Harris to repeat Joe Biden's 2020 wins in Michigan and Georgia, she will need to win the non-white cities of Detroit and Atlanta, as well as their surrounding suburbs. Analysis of the Reuters Ipsos poll shows that Harris has overtaken any advantage that Trump had held among middle-income households and suburbanites, who make up about half of the U.S. electorate. Harris also celebrated her 60th birthday on Sunday, which she kicked off with a visit to a church in Georgia. Meanwhile, Donald Trump campaigned in Pennsylvania this weekend, and on Sunday handed out French fries that he fried himself at a drive-through window of McDonald's. A photo op, but also a jab at Harris, who he claims lied about having worked at the fast food chain during her college years. During a rally in Pennsylvania, Trump made derogatory comments against his opponent, prompting a response from Harris in an interview with MSNBC on Sunday, where she said Americans deserve so much better and that Trump's behavior demeans the office. It is not uncommon for public figures to endorse presidential candidates. But Elon Musk, who has already endorsed Trump and committed at least $70 million to help the former president, has now pledged to give away $1 million each day until the November 5th election to a voter who signs his PAC petition. Legal experts are raising red flags about the giveaway because being a registered voter is one of the conditions to be eligible for the $1 million check. The main issue is due to a U.S. law that prohibits paying people to cast a vote or register to vote. For Harris, the Obamas will be making their first appearances on the campaign trail. She is scheduled to appear with the former president in Georgia on Thursday and with Michelle Obama in Michigan on Saturday. Incheon, Arirang News.
Now, more businesses in Korea are paying close attention to the two American candidates' plans on tariffs. Our Lee Soo-jin tells us why.
With the U.S. presidential election just 2 weeks away, South Korean companies are showing a growing interest in the candidates' economic policies. The Korea Chamber of Commerce and Industry announced on Monday that a survey it conducted of 300 manufacturing companies nationwide during the first 2 weeks of October showed that for both candidates, Korean companies were most interested in tariff policies. While current Vice President and the Democratic presidential nominee Kamala Harris is focusing her economic agenda on building an opportunity economy, former President and Republican presidential nominee Donald Trump has declared that he will create a manufacturing renaissance. And among Harris's policy plans, Korean companies were surveyed to be paying the most attention to her targeted and strategic tariff policy, which garnered 17.4% of the votes. This was closely followed by her policies involving expanding multilateral trade centered on allies, raising corporate taxes, de-risking policies regarding China, and decarbonization. As for Trump's pledges, which focus on bringing manufacturing jobs back to the U.S., Korean companies show the most interest in his universal and reciprocal tariffs, followed by his policies that include trade strategies aimed at eliminating the U.S. trade deficit, reducing benefits for foreign companies that are investing in the U.S., decoupling China, and lowering corporate taxes.
Harris targeted tariff aims to raise tariffs only on the sectors in Korea that have a large impact on the U.S. economy, while Trump's tariffs seek to hike tariffs by 20% on a broad range of sectors.
He added that this is why for Korean companies it is more beneficial for Harris to become president. And this comes amid growing concerns about rising protectionism worldwide. The Korea Trade Investment Promotion Agency reported 13 additional import regulation measures targeting Korean products in the first half of the year. The KCI said that because of the U.S. election's significant impact on global exports and supply chains, the government and companies need to work together on a strategy that will maximize national interests. 이수진, Arirang News.
Exports for the first 20 days of this month, that is October, fell on year amid fewer working days. According to the Korea Customs Service on Monday, the total value of exports amounted to $32.7 billion, down almost 3% on year. Despite this, some outbound shipments of semiconductors during the same period surged some 36% on year. The number of international flight passengers using South Korea's Incheon International Airport reached a record high in the third quarter of this year. The airport released data on Monday which stated that more than 18 million passengers used Incheon, which is nearly 18% more than the same period last year. By region, most of the passengers were traveling on routes to Southeast Asia, Japan, China, and North America. It added that this increase is mostly attributed to an increase in travelers during holidays, as well as a recovery in the number of passengers for flights to China. It is time to take a look at what's been happening in the world of sports. Joining us is our sports editor, Paul Need. Hello, Paul.
Evening. Hello.
Let's start with baseball in the KBO. The best of 7 Korean series starts tonight.
Yes, that's right. Game 1 was supposed to start at 6:30. The Samsung Lions versus the Kia Tigers at Gwangju Kia Champions Field, but rain delayed the start for well over an hour and finally began just after 7:30. It is currently the bottom of the third inning, level at 0-0. Now, the Kia Tigers are the champions of the regular season, and the Samsung Lions beat the LG Twins in the playoffs, winning 4 games. The Tigers and the Lions are first and second for the most championship wins. The Lions have won 8, the Kia Tigers 11. If the Kia Tigers win this year, it'll be their first in 7 years. KBO has been the hottest ticket in town of late. The regular season made history by surpassing 10 million spectators for the first time. And according to KBO on Sunday, postseason gate receipts amounted to over $75 million. Tonight's game sold out in just under 15 minutes.
Wow. And moving on to V-League volleyball, what are the main takeaways from the opening weekend?
Well, it's the V-League's 20th anniversary season, and it's a season that volleyball legend Kim Yeon-kyung is determined to end with a championship. The 36-year-old has delayed retirement with the aim of lifting the title with her team, the Incheon Int'l Life Pink Spiders. They began the new season with a 3-1 win over Hill State and are seeking a first title since 2019. In the men's game, 5 of the 7 teams are led by foreign coaches. Under Frenchman Philippe Blanc, the Chonan Hyundai Capital Skywalkers, who won the pre-season KBO Cup, are aiming to prevent the Incheon Korean Air Jumbos from winning a 5th title in a row. The Skywalkers beat Seoul Uricard Uriwon 3-2, while the Jumbos beat Ansan OK Financial Group Okman 3-1.
And moving on to football, Son Heung-min is back.
He is back and he marked his return with a goal. Son on Saturday scored in Tottenham Hotspur's 4-1 Premier League win over West Ham United. Son added the 4th for what was his 250th goal involvement for Spurs. In 416 games overall for the club, Son has now scored 165 and assisted another 85. Now, Son had missed the last 3 games, as well as Korea's 2 recent World Cup qualifiers due to a hamstring problem. Elsewhere in Europe, Lee Kang-in was on the score sheet for Paris Saint-Germain in the French Giants' 4-2 league win over Strasbourg on Sunday. It was his 4th goal in 8 league matches so far this season.
Right, and finally to golf. An LPGA tournament took place here in South Korea over the weekend.
It did, yes. The BMW Ladies Championship at Sowon Hills in Paju. It was won by Australian Hannah Green, who finished 19 under par, 269. It was a wire-to-wire win too, having led from the get-go. She takes home $330,000 and becomes the 3rd player with at least 3 LPGA victories this year, as well as the first Australian to win 3 since Carrie Webb in 2006. Song Yoo-jin and Choi Hye-jin both finished tied for 4th as the highest-ranked Korean players, finishing at 16 under par.
All right, thank you, Paul. I'll see you next week.
Thank you.
It was the coldest this fall in Seoul this morning, with temperatures dropping to 9.7 degrees. During the day, the autumn weather continued in cloudy weather. With chilly conditions, the rain will spread across the country overnight. From today to Wednesday, there will be up to 120 millimeters of heavy rain on Jeju Island, more than 100 on the southern coast, and 80 on the southern inland areas. Also, up to 60 millimeters of rain is expected in the center parts of the country. This rain will gradually stop from Wednesday dawn. Tomorrow, Seoul and Daegu will start off at 16 degrees. Highs will move up to 22 in Daegu and Gyeongju, Gwangju and Busan, 23 degrees. On Thursday, as the cold air moves south behind the rain clouds, the morning temperature in Seoul will drop to around 5 degrees Celsius. That's all for Korea. Here are the weather conditions around the world.
That is Newscenter for tonight. Thanks for watching. A panel session up next.
요즘 한국에선 어떻게 노는지 알려줄까? 한국에선 아이돌이 되어볼 수도 인생 번호를 찾을 수도 있지. 제일 핫한 포토 스팟은 여기. 한국은 분명 너에게 새로운 영감을 줄 거야.
이런 한국, 와보지 않고는 모를걸? 진짜 한국에선 어떻게 먹는지 알려줄까?
K-바비큐? 신김치랑 먹어야지.
치킨? 치맥 페스티벌은 처음이지?
김치? 종류만큼 먹는 법도 가지각색. 김밥? 시장에선, 산에선, 바다에선 이렇게.
국밥? 취향 따라, 입맛 따라. 이런 한국, 와보지 않고는 모를걸?
재단과 함께하는 K챗이 새로운 시즌으로 돌아옵니다.
이게 제 가방이에요.
지금 뭐예요?
엽전으로 기름떡볶이를 사는 중이에요.
저는 집에서 음악을 듣고 있어요.
경복궁 구경한 후에 저녁 먹어요. 정말 커요. 제 팔만 해요.
한국을 여행하면서 사용할 수 있는 한국어 표현부터 흥미로운 한국 문화까지 더 풍성하고 재미있는 K챗 트래블링 코리아에서 만나요.
오래전 바닷길로 떠났던 당신이 세상 역경을 이기고 대한민국의 힘이 되어 하늘길로 돌아옵니다. 머나먼 타국에서 가슴 깊이 그리던 조국. 대한민국의 품으로 우리 동포들이 돌아오는 그날이 오면 배웅한 곳에서 맞이하겠습니다.
Welcome to Within the Frame, where we delve into the most up-to-date issues across the globe. I'm Kim Mo-gen. In the Middle East, Israel is continuing its offensive into Gaza, even after eliminating Hamas's leader Yahya Sinwar. The Gaza Health Ministry says at least 87 people were killed by an Israeli airstrike in northern Gaza on Sunday, adding that 40 civilians were among the dead. The estimated toll brings the number of Palestinians killed or missing in Gaza since Friday night to more than 100. Now, this latest attack comes despite hopes for a ceasefire by Western and Arab nations following the death of Sinwar. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu said on Saturday that Israel was determined to achieve all its war objectives and change the security reality in its region. So where is this deadly war headed, and what are the potential repercussions to the international community? For answers to this, we connect to Park Hyun-do, a professor at the Seogang Eurometa Institute. Welcome to the show, Professor Park.
Thank you for having me. Thank you.
And we're also joined by Robert Lawrence, assistant professor at Dongdak Women's University Online. Great to have you, Professor Lawrence.
Thank you very much for having me.
So let's begin with Professor Lawrence. Like I said in our introduction, at least 87 people were killed in Saturday's Israeli airstrike on the city of Beit Lahia. How did you see this? Was the attack anticipated? And looking ahead, what kind of future scenarios do you foresee for the Middle East?
Okay, well, it's extremely difficult to ascertain the necessary information to make a good assessment on what happened in Beit Lahia on Saturday night. The Hamas-run health ministry in Gaza came out with numbers pretty quickly, and Israel and Hamas disagree on the numbers, which is a pattern we've seen repeated time and time again over the last year. Until we have enough information about the civilian deaths and the actual target of the attack, it's tough to assess the situation. But of course, if there were indeed 40 civilians killed, then that would be tragic. As far as future scenarios go, in putting some of this into context, there have been a variety of escalatory activity from all actors involved in the last week. So the outlook is pretty dangerous, to be honest. On the other hand, you had the head of Shin Bet in Cairo for talks on a hostage deal yesterday, while U.S. diplomats are being sent to the region to try to secure some sort of hostage deal or ceasefire before the election. But I fear that we're not really going to see a clear path forward until the scope in the direction of the Israeli retaliation for the Iranian missile attack, it kind of plays itself out, And of course, we're going to have to see what the Iranian response is. So until we see the results of this round of escalation between Iran and Israel, I don't think we're going to have a clear view of things.
Right. And Professor Lawrence, before this, Hamas's leader Yahya Sinwar was killed on October 16th. Now, this comes after the death of former Hamas political chief Ismail Haniyeh. What kind of impact will the leadership vacuum within Hamas have on its internal cohesion?
Yeah. Well, certainly, with the death of Yahya Sinwar, there's going to be some jockeying for positioning within Hamas. He was both the military and the political leader of the movement. And for many Hamas members, he was a bit revered because of his relationship with Sheikh Yassin, who is the founder of Hamas, and his uncompromising approach to the Hamas cause. The death of Sinwar is a big blow to Hamas, but he is replaceable. I think sometimes people get that confused. Politically speaking, he only led the movement for a few months. And therefore, he was unlikely to have forged any path dependency that would make, that would limit the Shura Council's capacity to choose the most pragmatic candidate, depending on how they want to move forward. One likely candidate is Khalil al-Hayya, who's an exiled leader with close ties to Iran. Another is Khalid Mashal, but there's some difficulties with his past political posturing that might complicate his ascendancy. Militarily speaking, his brother, Mohammed Sinwar, is a likely successor, and he's a very capable military leader. He was in charge of the Khan Yunis brigade, and he was head of logistics and manpower for Hamas. So, Hamas as a whole, for its part, it's said that Sinwar's death is only going to strengthen the cause and their resolve, and it's shaping his narrative as a martyr who fought to the very end in an attempt to try to get like a rally around the flag effect, I believe. So I think all in all, I don't see the vacuum being as big as some people hoped it would be. I'm not sure that there's as much space to maneuver in as people hoped there would be.
Now, what about Professor Park? In the wake of Sinwar's death, Khalid Mashal, like Professor Lawrence just mentioned, has reportedly taken on a leadership role in Hamas. And can you remind our viewers who is Khalid Mashal and who is likely to become a next official leader?
Khalid Mashal actually was a very influential the leader within the Hamas, and he has led the Hamas political bureau from 1996 to 2017, and until he was replaced by Ismail Haniyeh, who was killed again by the Israeli government, actually, in Iran. So he is about 6 years older than Yahya Sinwar, and most of his life, actually, he spent his life outside of Palestine, the Gaza. So probably even though he tried to get in touch with a lot of people and with the people in the Gaza, but nevertheless, he is less popular, I would say, than the Yahya Sinwar. Yahya Sinwar is quite popular because actually he has always contact with the people in Gaza. But the Khalid Mashal actually spent most of his life outside of the Palestine, and also he did not have a good relationship after the civil war broke out in Syria. And he didn't have any good relationship with Iran or Syria. So he has kind of a problem with the Iranian government and also Syria. But nevertheless, now he's acting head of the Hamas, but we don't know who will actually be elected as a new chief. But anyway, the Yahya Sinwar is also, as Professor Lawrence mentioned, actually any leader is replaceable. And the leader is important, but leader is then much important. Actually, the spirit of the opposition and resistance would be very important, and that spirit will go on and on, and as long as Hamas is alive.
Right. So regardless of who the leader becomes, the regional atmosphere would stay still for the meantime. Now, there's also speculation that Sinwar's body could be used as leverage in negotiations for the release of Israeli hostages. Professor Park, what is your perspective on this potential development?
I don't think it is quite actually negotiable. I don't think the body of the Yahya Sinwar is that much important for the Hamas movement right now. And Hamas would not actually yield, would not release the Israeli hostages in exchange for the body of Yahya Sinwar. So I think probably it is very difficult to use the body of Yahya Sinwar as a bargaining chip for the Israeli government. Probably Israeli government needs to think twice. Right now, the Hamas has nothing to lose right now, so they would not stop actually the provocating or resisting against Israel, the forces, the Israeli government. So the use of the Yahya Sinwar's body as a bargaining chip is not actually will not work as far as I know.
Now, on October 18th, Hezbollah, which forms part of the axis of resistance with Hamas, attacked Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu's residence with drones. Professor Lawrence, what implications does this have for the regional dynamics in the Middle East?
Right. So, they sent drones into Caesarea, where Netanyahu's house is, and this is playing out very interestingly in the media. Iran has come out publicly and put the blame squarely on the shoulders of Lebanese Hezbollah, while Israel is blaming and threatening Iran. So this is a bit dangerous regionally because it could be used as an excuse to widen the scope of the retaliation for the October 1st missile attack on Israel. In the wake of this attack on Netanyahu's home, some of the more hawkish members of the Knesset, the legislative body in Israel, they've explicitly called for the retaliation to include strategic facilities and political and military elite. So naturally, if Israel were to escalate in such a fashion, it would be met with a retaliation from Iran, which could summon the expansion of the conflict into a greater regional conflict. So it's a dangerous attempt, and it raises the possibility of a wider regional war.
Right, that sounds very concerning at this point. Now, despite this developments, there had been increased calls for a ceasefire in Gaza following Sinwar's death. However, the warring parties have shown little interest in responding to this. Professor Park, why? What does each party really want to pursue ultimately?
Hamas actually goes further. Actually, there is no stopping on the part of the Hamas. Actually, they would continue to resist against the Israeli government, and also Israel actually right now has all the chances to make a peace with the Hamas, but I don't think that Prime Minister Netanyahu would do so. And right now, the body is in the court of the United States. So the Secretary of State, Mr. Blinken, is set to travel again to the Middle East to make a peace possible. But I think that is also very difficult to achieve. Right now, probably the Democratic government of the United States would like to see the ceasefire achieved. But nevertheless, Hamas nor Israeli government is set to do so. Particularly, Mr. Netanyahu would continue the attack and also make actually the situation much more difficult for ceasefire until at least the American presidential election day on the 5th of November. So things will be changing after the election, but before the election, I don't think there will be any ceasefire.
Then, Professor, can I just ask a quick question? Why is the American election date very important for them? Can you help us elaborate? Yes.
I think probably Mr. Netanyahu would like to see Mr. Trump get elected. Because actually Trump has been very friendly with Mr. Netanyahu, and Netanyahu will get a lot actually if Mr. Trump is elected. The Democratic Party, particularly the Biden-Harris team, actually has been very helpful for the Israel to attack and also the avenge the Hamas. But nevertheless, Mr. Netanyahu does not like the new president, actually, the Harris, because Harris is no different from Mr. Obama, the former president, because Mr. Obama was very pessimistic and very actually negative about the Mr. Netanyahu. And Netanyahu knows too well that if the Harris is elected, there is less room for Israel to actually maneuver in terms of Palestinian matters.
Right. And in relation to this, Israel gave the United States a document last week with its conditions for a diplomatic solution to the end of the war in Lebanon. Professor Lawrence, can you tell us, for the sake of our viewers, what did it ask for? And what do you think are the chances of the U.S. and the international community accepting the offer?
Okay, so it appears that Israel, as a part of any diplomatic solution to the war in Lebanon, wants the IDF to be able to engage in active enforcement to prevent Hezbollah from reconstituting its infrastructure close to the Israeli border. And it also wants its Air Force to have the capacity to operate inside of Lebanese airspace. So this is in reference to UN Security Council Resolution 1701, which concluded the 2006 Hezbollah-Israel war. So, this resolution basically stated that the area between the Litani River and the Blue Line, which is the demarcation line between Lebanon and Israel, can only be used by the Lebanese army and UN interim forces. Israel's argument is that those forces haven't done their jobs in keeping Hezbollah out. And if those forces do their jobs, then and keep Hezbollah out of the area, the IDF will do less, and vice versa. As far as this proposal's acceptance goes, to be honest, I really doubt that Lebanon is going to accept this, or anybody else in the international community. It sounds awfully like an occupation. The U.S. would prefer to elevate the status of the Lebanese military, and that's part of this push as well, I think. In order to make them the primary security apparatus for the country, and thus that degrades Hezbollah's position in the country. But for the time being, I think this is wishful thinking. We've heard a lot in the media and in think tanks about this opportunity to kind of put the Lebanese state back in control of Lebanon and dismiss the non-state actor of Hezbollah and its control over Lebanon. But I really think that right now Hezbollah is still the dominant force in the country. So I think it's going to be tough to actually make that happen.
Right. So it sounds like the conflict is going to be ongoing for the meantime. Then, speaking of which, what are the potential long-term consequences of this conflict for the stability of the Middle East?
Well, we'll have to see how things pan out over the next couple weeks or days. We're all still awaiting the Israeli response to the missile attacks and then the counter response by Iran. This could manifest itself in several ways. If they hit oil infrastructure, for example, then the retaliation could go to Gulf countries, which could widen the conflict. So there are a lot of variables in play that could change the direction and thus the regional security because of the conflict. But I would argue that there are at least two long-term consequences that seem apparent to most observers. One is that Iran's forward defense, which is their policy that messes in the resistance, right? It's been severely depleted, but not destroyed over the last year. Hamas is a shadow of itself. Hezbollah's leadership and military capacity have been reduced. And just in the last week, the Houthis took a big hit with the U.S. B-2 stealth bombers hitting storage facilities. And this changes other regional actors' strategies and how to deal with Iran's regional hegemonic ambitions. Another consequence that I think is going under the radar right now, dangerously under the radar, is that this conflict is taken away from a very serious problem in a resurgent IS. The Islamic State no longer holds territory and collects taxes the way it did back in 2014, 2015, but it's still a very viable terrorist and insurgent organization, and it's reconstituting itself in Syria. They've carried out over 500 attacks in Syria this year alone. They thrive in chaos, and this conflict certainly works as a recruiting tool for them. So from a security and stability standpoint, I think this is something that the world really needs to pay attention to, because in 2014 there was a lot of surprise. People didn't necessarily see IS coming the way the way they came, and I think right now the pieces of the puzzle are all there, and it's a dangerous situation.
Right. So it's concerning that this conflict could lead to more and expand its size. Now, another conflict that's been persisting is the Russia-Ukraine war. Professor Park, how do you see the conflict between Israel and Hamas influencing Russia's military and political calculations in Eastern Europe?
I think that probably without the Ukraine war, probably Russia would have a better chance to talk about a lot of things in the Middle East, what is going on. But right now, Russia is tied. Russia's hands is tied. Actually, there's not much room for the Russia to maneuver right now. So I don't think the Israeli-Hamas war the Israel-Hamas war actually restrained the movement of the Russia, particularly because the lack of the troops and lack of the weapons and the lot of actually money and weapons are going into the Ukraine. So the Russia has a hard time dealing with Ukraine. So in a sense, because the Russia is too busy dealing with the Ukraine, it doesn't have any capacity to deal with Middle Eastern situation, and that is actually the Israel and United States actually take a good advantage of the difficulties Russia is right now facing.
Right. Then what about the rest of the world? What kind of impact might the Middle East conflict have on global oil prices, and also how could that affect economies like South Korea?
Well, as long as Israel would not actually make the war bigger and wider, I don't think there will be any problem. But well, there is a rumor today actually that Israel would strike oil facilities in Iran. So if the Israel is ready to strike the oil facilities, actually very soon, then that would be a very hellish, actually, not only for Korea, but also for the whole world. So I hope actually the Israel would restrain, but there is no country can possibly stop right now Israel. Particularly recently, the Hezbollah drone attack was made on the home of the Mr. Netanyahu, and right now Israel likes to retaliate. So before that drone incident, Israel actually promised to United States that we would not target oil or nuclear facilities, but suddenly it changed. I don't know whether Israel would really dare to attack oil facilities in Iran, but if so, then that would be a very difficult situation. Actually, the Korea and the whole world would face.
Right. Now, given this complexities of both Middle East conflict and the war in Ukraine, Professor Lawrence, what do you believe is the most critical step that the international community should take to promote lasting peace and stability in both regions?
That's the magic question, in a way, I guess.
It's magic.
I'm a bit hesitant to say too much about the Russo-Ukrainian war because it's a little bit outside of my wheelhouse. Regarding Israel and its conflicts with Iran and Iran's regional proxies, I won't pretend to know what kind of current negotiations are going on behind closed doors and the intricacies of current state-to-state and multilateral talks because I'm not privy to the actual information. But I would argue that I think the most important thing the international community can do right now is read more and listen to people who disagree with you so that the global community understands the complexities of the conflict and can have a more nuanced conversation about how to fix it. When we see a lot of the protests going on, or even sometimes the conversations going on in the UN, it kind of seems like two groups of people talking past each other with the talking points from their respective echo chambers, and it isn't working. I think, honestly, the global community, we need to read more, listen more, and for those of us lucky enough to live in democracies, make your voice heard.
Right. Professor Park, do you have any last words?
Simple, ceasefire. That is the best way.
Right. Let's hope for also a ceasefire and at least for the war not to expand to a bigger scale. Gentlemen, thank you so much for your insights tonight. We appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Now that wraps up our program for tonight. Thank you so much for joining us. We'll be back tomorrow at 8:30 p.m. Korea time. Until then, goodbye.
Smart Biz